Hello and good afternoon. I'm Don Arleth and you're watching your midday report here on TVP World. At the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Vladimir Putin fired off a new volley of talking points, albeit full of contradictions. First, he credited Donald Trump for preventing a war that Vladimir Putin himself chose to launch, which continues to rage on. Next, he dangled the prospect of direct talks with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, while at the same time questioning the Ukrainian leader's legitimacy and whether Zelenskyy has the legal authority to sign a peace deal. Alexandra Bulenda has more on this twist of the narrative.
Speaking to Russian media, Putin first invoked US politics, arguing that a Trump presidency would have averted the invasion and claiming he previously urged former President Joe Biden to avoid a hot conflict.
Trump has repeatedly said that if he were the president, the war in Ukraine would not have happened. I believe he is correct in this regard. Let me explain why. In one of my last phone conversations with Mr. Biden, I won't go into details now, though we naturally have records of this discussion, I explicitly told him that conflicts, especially hot conflicts, must be avoided and that all issues should be resolved through peaceful means.
The Russian leader then pivoted to diplomacy, saying he's willing to meet anyone Ukraine trusts, including Zelenskyy, but only at the tail end of negotiations.
We are ready to meet, and by the way, I said that I am ready to meet with everyone, including Zelenskyy. Yes, that's not the question. If the Ukrainian state trusts someone to negotiate, for God's sake, let it be Zelenskyy. That's not the question. The question is, who will sign the document?
Analysts in an interview for TVP World say the open-door rhetoric is less a peace overture and more a pressure tactic.
This is one of the ways to put pressure on Ukraine, to put pressure also on Western allies of Ukraine to kind of highlight this issue with non-elections last year and sort of casting doubt over Zelensky's legitimacy.
Beyond talks, Putin warned that Berlin would make itself competent if it supplied Taurus missiles, yet claiming such weapons would not halt Russian advances. He also branded NATO's higher defense budget as hype and insisted Moscow poses no threat. As the Kremlin alternates between invitation and intimidation, Western capitals will wait whether Putin foreign remarks signal flexibility or simply the latest layer of a strategic fog.
The EU's €1.5 billion defense financing plan, also known as the EDIP, is one step closer to becoming a reality. If the latest iteration gets enough support at a meeting on Monday, it is poised to potentially benefit Polish military producers and national coffers. Here's more from our EU correspondent Angela Skujins in Brussels.
According to EU sources, European leaders are very close to finalising the European Commission's €1.5 billion push to ensure that member states spend better and locally on procuring their military capabilities. Now, the European Commission handed down this proposal in May 2024, and part of the deal was ensuring that 65% of these military components were produced in an EU member state or associated countries such as Norway or Ukraine. But since this proposal was laid bare, there's been significant debate regarding that number. We had a gaggle of MEPs in the European Parliament calling for that number to be revised up to 70%. But according to our sources, ambassadors that met on Wednesday agreed that it should remain at 65%. Also, that EU member states should be able to tap into their COVID funds. We're talking about the recovery and resilience facility funds. Poland has about €60 billion sitting there. We know that Warsaw successfully applied to recently move roughly €6 billion from this pool of cash to spend on defence. So we're expecting this to be warmly received in Warsaw so they can spend more on ramping up their military capabilities without falling foul of the EU's fiscal rules and not having to tap into their own national budgets. This proposal will be debated, hopefully, and approved on Monday at a Foreign Affairs Council meeting in the Belgian capital. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Ahead of the annual NATO summit in The Hague, and we already know what's in the works. According to experts, the main outcome expected from next week's gathering of leaders from the alliance will be an agreement on 5% defense spending target. Apart from pledging 3.5% of GDP for traditional military spending, NATO officials are expected to also pledge 1.5% on related expenses such as infrastructure and cyberdefense. Michał Stanisławski has the details.
For 2 days, beginning from June 24th, all eyes will be turned to The Hague as NATO leaders gather there for a formal alliance summit. The main objective of the meeting? Raising defense spending.
It will be very much focused on 5% target, and that will be the most relevant to say right now that it will be the focus of the discussion and also the outcome of the NATO summit at The Hague.
US President Donald Trump is therefore expected to leave the summit with a victory. Already as president-elect, NATO's defense spending stood among the top points of Trump's agenda.
Well, I think NATO should have 5%, yeah. Well, you can't do it at 2%. I mean, at 2%, every country, if you're going to have a country in a regular military, you're at 4%. I think they should be, they're in dangerous territory. I think it should be, they can all afford it.
The expectations are not without merit, as NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte unveiled the proposal just 2 weeks ago.
I will propose an overall investment plan that will total 5% of GDP in defense investment, 3.5% of GDP for core defense spending. This is based on what it will cost to meet the new capability targets that ministers have just agreed.
In addition to core defence spending, member countries will also spend 1.5% on defence-related projects, including investments in infrastructure and cyber capabilities. One important matter, however, is still unknown: the timeline.
If the implication timeline is actually given at the summit, because there are different perceptions of what it could be. Is it 2032, 2030, 2035? Depending on which member states spends how much on the defense spending, they have different perceptions of how and when they can achieve 5%.
While the war in Ukraine will also be a major topic of the summit, Vladimir Zelensky's presence in The Hague is not certain. The Ukrainian president is currently planning to attend the summit. However, a final decision will be made closer to the event. Already in March, Vladimir Zelenskyy had this to say about Ukraine's possible absence from The Hague.
I think that if Ukraine is not present at the NATO summit, it will be Putin's victory, not over Ukraine, but over NATO.
So far, Zelenskyy has only received an invitation to a dinner hosted by Dutch King Willem-Alexander. Whether with or without Zelenskyy, experts say that if the summit doesn't result in strong support for Ukraine's sovereignty, it will send a weak message to its adversaries in the East.
MAGA divided. A rift among Donald Trump supporters over U.S. involvement in the Israel-Iran war seems to be widening, as a growing number of conservative politicians and commentators are speaking out against deploying American forces to the Middle East. This comes amid an escalation in the conflict and Donald Trump considering his options. Piotr Miszczuk has the story.
I am the candidate of peace. I am peace. My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier, and I will end the chaos in the Middle East.
Donald Trump doesn't seem to be delivering on his promises to bring peace to the world. Instead, he is now weighing whether the US should close ranks with Israel against Iran.
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change. I mean, especially with war. Things change with war. It can go from one extreme to the other.
Known as one of the staunchest Trump supporters in the House of Representatives, Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene voiced her discontent with warmongers in the MAGA camp.
Anyone slobbering for the U.S. to become fully involved in the Israel-Iran war is not America First MAGA. Wishing for murder of innocent people is disgusting. We are sick and tired of foreign wars. All of them.
In an exchange between Republican Texas Senator Ted Cruz and Trump-aligned political commentator Tucker Carlson, which grew heated over the Middle East conflict, the officials suggested the U.S. was already aiding Israel in its strikes on Iran.
We're carrying out military strikes today.
You said Israel was.
Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're supporting.
Well, you're breaking news here because the U.S. government last night denied, the National Security Council spokesman Alex Pfeiffer denied on behalf of Trump that we were acting on Israel's behalf in any offensive capacity.
No, we're not bombing them. Israel's bombing them.
You just said we were.
According to a recent opinion poll, more than half of Trump's voters do not approve of the U.S. Army joining the Israeli military operation in Iran. Among the general public, support for such a move is even lower.
I just think it's two unpredictable regimes fighting in the Middle East. And it's their war. It's not our war. And I hope it doesn't become our war.
Some Americans even suspect a hidden agenda behind this latest chapter in the Middle East conflict.
I don't know, I'm kind of used to expensive gas. I don't think we need to blow up the whole country to have cheap gas.
It remains uncertain what the near future holds for the American involvement in the Israel-Iran war, but as of yet, Donald Trump hasn't ruled out any possibilities. For TVP World, I'm Piotr Miszczuk.
This summer marks 40 years since the Schengen Agreement first paved the way for open borders in Europe. But at the Polish-German frontier, newly reinstated border checks are prompting debate. As the region welcomes a wave of summer tourists, questions are emerging about how these measures could shape travel and cross-border ties in the months ahead. Our reporter Sasha Farbach was at the border and has more.
Now, 40 years ago, this month in June, Schengen, that agreement for free movement of people, came into being. And that's been incredibly important for all of Europe, but especially something very palpable here on the border with Germany and Poland. Also two countries that share sometimes a very painful history, but also history very much with a common future. Now, it's also been a hub now. This whole Baltic coast on the Polish side is seeing a huge tourism boom in these last years, especially this year in 2025. The numbers are almost 20 million, almost to those pre-pandemic levels, and it's drawing tourists from Germany and across Europe. And that reaction to how they feel about visiting Poland has been quite positive.
We've only been up here for a short time, but the prices are better. Cheaper, which is of course very good for us, especially when you go out to eat as a couple or something like that. What we pay in Germany is quite a lot, and here you get away with it much more cheaply.
We have been to Poland many times, and we have always enjoyed the hospitality, we have enjoyed the landscapes, and we have enjoyed the cultural monuments. We love being in Poland.
Now, as this tourist boom here sees a surge, and people are refusing to go to hotspots like traditional hotspots like Bali or other places around Europe. They're being drawn here to the Baltic coast in Poland. That means cities like Świnoujście here, just a few kilometers away, and also Danzig or Gdańsk in the North Baltic coast. What's drawing them is better prices, lower prices, also cooler climate and competitive rates for staying. And obviously for that Polish and German relationship, that's meaningful. Now, at the same time, from Berlin, we're hearing more checks on the border, tougher controls coming. That is going to impact not only commuters, but also potentially tourists. Now, experts themselves have also given their concern.
Tensions are already there, and they're on the rise. The more that these controls are done against the will of these neighboring states, the more tensions we will see. And we have a new German government which made better relations with Poland a key priority. So this is really a fact that is hindering the improvement of the bilateral ties between the two countries. So I expect more frictions as long as these controls are implemented and maybe even expanded.
Now, as we await for more from authorities in Berlin, we've also asked tourists here who are visiting this region on both sides of the border how they feel about potential new border checks coming here, which would make this bike ride here across the border without any checks much more difficult. But we received a very mixed response and also emotional responses to what this border crossing could mean.
Border controls are advisable, even heightened in some cases, I believe. This is to prevent unwanted guests from entering our homeland. If there is the Schengen zone, then there shouldn't be any border controls. So it would be sad if you had to show your passport here again and there were controls, I think. Everything is conspicuous. I agree about the border openings. The external border should be much more tightly controlled, and there would be no need for these internal borders.
Now, ultimately, a place like this serves as a good example of how free movement of people has benefited, not just tourists, but also especially the relationship between Poland and Germany. Now, time will tell if those harder border checks will make border crossings like this a thing of the past. Of course, that tourist boom for now and those connections for the moment will continue. That's Sasha Farbach for TVP World at the Polish-German border.
And that's all on Midday Report. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for more here on TVP World.